Mr. Speaker.
I call Kelvin Davis.
Tēnā rā koe, Mr. Speaker. Kei te hehea hau te tāpirihia ōku mihi mai aha ki rongi e wera ku taina atu ki ronga tērā o ngā matua o Ngāti Hine ara a Erima Henare, te pāpa o tō mātou hoa a pēni nā reire te pāpa Erima moi atu rā. Mr. Speaker, initially I'd just like to take umbrage with the comments from Marama Fox saying that she was going to be at Waitangi this year for the first time instead of being at Carterton, and saying that she was concerned walking a couple of feet behind the Prime Minister that she might be pelted with something. And on behalf of all Ngāpuhi, I just would like to say I'm taking umbrage at that. Anybody who's worked with Ngāpuhi, such as the Honourable Chris Finlayson, will know that we are calm, dignified, rational iwi who will always resort to diplomacy to resolve any of our issues, and to suggest that there would be trouble amongst Ngāpuhi is ludicrous. But Mr. Speaker, I'd like to go straight to the issue around the 4 tupuna Māori, and we had a submission. I'm not on the Māori Affairs Select Committee, but it just so happened on this day I was subbing in for somebody, and Arapeta Hamilton submitted saying that it was unfair that the 4 Māori families had one representative and other families had a representative each. Arapeta, his mother and my father are first cousins, and like Penny, Pōmare, who's mentioned in this bill, is our great-great-great-great-grandfather. We're direct descendants. He was a contemporary of Kawati, and I have to say I agree with what Pita Praone said earlier, that wondering why Maihi Kawati is the name that's the ancestor of the Kawati family when Te Ruki was his father. And by having Maihi instead of Te Ruki, you're sort of omitting the father, and I think it would be better to have Te Ruki and Maihi Kawati is acknowledged as part of that whānau. Then we have the Honeheke whānau. As we know, Honeheke was the first signatory of the treaty, and I'll just come back to that. We also have the Tamati Wakanene whānau, whose father Tapua was one of the first people to go out and greet Captain Cook when he arrived in Whangaroa, well, not far from the Cavalli Islands, where Dover Samuels does a lot of fishing. But just to go back to Honeheke being the first signatory of the treaty, my tūpuna Pōmare, who's included in this bill, signed the treaty on the 17th of February, not the 6th of February. And he was a bit miffed that his name might be under a name that he considered inferior to his, so he and a few others signed on top. So if you actually look at the signatories of the Treaty of Waitangi, the third name down is Pōmare of Ngāti Manu, which is our hapu. But there are 2 Pōmares, and I just really want to correct history, because you see in a lot of books, they often get the names mixed up. The first Pōmare, he was born Whiria, and often they say his name was Whetoi, and Whetoi was actually his nephew. Whiria, when he died, met his Waterloo down in Nanaia Mahuta's neck of the woods on the Waipa River. To commemorate his name, his nephew Whetoi took his name and became Pōmare. Pōmare's name is actually a Tahitian name, and when some European captain came over, he brought with him a couple of Tahitian interpreters, because the languages in those days were pretty similar. And the Tahitians said, actually, the king of Tahiti is our king Pōmare. And my ancestor Whiria, the first person who became Pōmare here, he said, well, if it's good enough for the king of Tahiti to be named Pōmare, I'll take that name. And so that's how he became Pōmare. Anyway, he died in about 1826, and Whetoi, his nephew, took the name Pōmare, and he's the signatory of the Treaty of Waitangi. An interesting, well, I find it interesting fact is that his son Hare had married a woman called Hariata from Te Ahuahu and around Ohaiwai, and they went over to England as part of a group, a concert party, I think, and they had an audience with Queen Victoria. And Hariata at that time was pregnant. And Queen Victoria said to her, if that baby is a girl, name her after me, Victoria. If it's a boy, name him after my husband, who was Albert Victor, the consort. So she had the baby, and he was the first Māori to be born in England. And he was a boy, so he was named Albert Victor Pomare. And that name, and Queen Victoria said, I want to be his godmother. And so she became his godmother. She presented him with some clothes, a christening gown that we still have in the possession somewhere. It might be in a museum, but I've handled it. It's still there. Gold goblet, knife, fork and spoon, and other gifts. Queen Victoria paid for his tuition at St. Stephen's School. He, in later life, joined the Royal Navy and was, after that, we believe he may have been shipwrecked in America and strangely enough, mistaken for a runaway slave. But we're just not quite sure where Albert Victor Pomare's, where he went. We lost track of him after that. But the name Albert Victor, or Arapeta, is a name, Arapeta Wikita, or Albert Victor, is a name that runs through our family, the Pomare family, to the extent that the submitter, Albert Victor Hamilton, or Arapeta Wikita Hamilton, was the relation of mine who submitted, saying that it was unfair that the Māori families only had one representative. And I entirely endorse his sentiment. It's, it's only right that the Māori whānau have the same level of representation as the non-Māori whānau. So Whetoi Pomare signed the Treaty of Waitangi, and so he's a signatory to what I've often referred to in this house as the bridge between the Māori and the Pākehā New Zealand that we know today, which is sort of ironic because my mother's father, my Pākehā grandfather, actually physically built the bridge from Te Tii Marae over to the other side of the Waitangi River. And that bridge, I believe, might have been opened at the same time in 1934 as the first Waitangi Day was held. And I recall seeing as a child a number of black and white photos that my mother had in a photo album of the huge crowds at Waitangi on that day in 1934. And it's just interesting that my Pākehā grandfather literally built a bridge, and my Māori great-great-great-great-grandfather metaphorically built the bridge that is the Treaty of Waitangi. Mr. Speaker, we've heard the history about the treaty grounds and how it was basically fell into neglect after the treaty was signed. It was in the 1880s that I think it was Mrs. Busby sold it off. There were some Māori chiefs who wanted to have a ceremonial whare built there, and the government of the day declined it. Eventually we had a ceremonial whare nui built there, and it was opened in 1940 to commemorate the centenary. As somebody who grew up in the Bay of Islands, I spent a lot of time around the treaty grounds, not necessarily so much because I was visiting, but because the golf course is next door, and there's a hole that runs up the hill, and I've got a terrible hook shot and had to climb over the fence a number of times to go and retrieve balls. But the Waitangi treaty grounds, I grew up with it, have visited a number of times, and it's a big part of New Zealand. I take what people say though, Waitangi is becoming greater than just the geographical area of Waitangi now. The whole meaning of Waitangi and the Treaty of Waitangi spreads out to the Kātatins of the world and to all around New Zealand. So, Mr. Speaker, we do support this bill, and we look forward to it becoming law. Kia ora.